Part 14. I can't put enough quotation marks around the word story, so I won't try. I can't believe it, I'm here at last. If you've made it this far, you've probably been questioning my sanity, and also wondering why I'm taking this so damn seriously. I mean, why this game above all the others? Well, you see, I take issue with the common public perception of this particular title. It's considered a classic and held in high regard by many. Even people who aren't fans of it tend to say it's just average or doesn't do anything wrong. So my main goal was to knock this game off the pedestal that people put it on. As I said way back at the start, to expose this game's story for the sham that it is. Sure, there's always going to be those people who just don't care, and will defend the stupid game to the death because they had fun with it, and act like nothing else matters. The types that basically treat all games or forms of entertainment like toys instead of works of art. All I can say to those people is that their attitude stifles intelligent discussion, and reinforces a culture that is concerned with personal gratification above all else. By saying things like that, you're basically making it clear that you don't care at all about the artistic qualities of anything, and you're showing an intense amount of ignorance towards the creative effort that is put into these works, and the ideas that can be extrapolated from them. And if you're really down with that, then you're just a fucking Philistine, and I don't care about your opinion. But as for you people who actually give a damn about stuff like that, well, for starters, we could talk about themes. So, what are the themes for FE7? And for those of you who didn't pay attention in school, a theme is an idea that recurs in or pervades a work of art or literature. The main one fans of this game will point to is family. But really, this theme is more of an underlying one than an overlying one. There's not really a concise statement about family or anything. The most you could draw from FE7 is that family is important, but that's a very uncontroversial and kind of boring point. I suppose the story does present a multitude of different situations, in which we see family members reacting to events and interacting with each other, and it kind of does make a case for who you consider your family being more important than who is your family. But most of that stuff is relegated to support conversations, and I honestly don't think the game explores the idea of a family unit in depth at all. You could even say that when Ninian ditches her only relative in the world to stay with Eliwood and die young, that this idea is being contradicted. I guess she's sort of choosing a new family? The same goes for the theme of friendship. Most of it is stuff that you just kind of take for granted. There's not really any powerful points made about it. I know I complained about how Ninian was resurrected, but at least if she'd been resurrected via the power of friendship, that would cement the theme in a bit. It's stupid, but this game is stupid, so why not? I mean, Awakening did it, and I think it works okay there. And yeah, shock, horror. I just said something mildly positive about Awakening. Bite me. But not too hard. Maybe you could say that there's a theme to do with avoiding war at all costs, but it doesn't really have anything to say about pacifism or the politics of peace. They just have to sneak around when they're killing people, because if they don't, it causes a giant plot hole. And besides, having a theme is not some kind of defense against criticism. It doesn't mean anything by itself. My basement has a theme. It's dark and very deep. Themes are supposed to be ways to convey ideas and statements from the creators to the audience. I think the fact that FE7 is so hands-off in this regard is kinda damning when you consider that the majority of the games in the series do tend to have much stronger points they want to make. Like in Arcanea, they're talking about how the oppressed humans became oppressors, and how the humans are the real problem in the setting, despite us all acting like the big bad evil shadow dragon is the source of everything. Or in Juke Troll, which argues against the idea of divine right of kings, or how small mistakes can add up to big catastrophes. It's the belief of some people that after Kaga left, you know, the original creative director and idea guy for the series, that intelligence systems lost the ability to execute stories with these kind of concepts. But I say that's bullshit. Magvel has got a strong running series of dualisms about how there are two sides to everything that are interconnected, and Tellius, or at least FE9, makes a big deal about moving on from past atrocities and looking to the future, how enemies are only relative, and there's some stuff about order versus chaos in there too. And I'm only really scratching the surface of these games here. FE7 is comparatively really shallow. I think part of the reason the game is so shallow is that it's incredibly restricted. What do I mean by that? Well, by being a prequel, it inherently limits itself a lot. A prequel has to avoid stepping on the toes of the story it precedes, but simultaneously, it has to tie in with it in some way, or it kind of defeats the point of being a prequel. The closer it's set to the original, the more it will tie in, but then the established history gets very rigid and inflexible. The further away it's set, the more flexible things are, but then they lack a connection. And if you pick some legendary backstory from the original, you run the serious risk of demystifying the whole thing. So from the very start, you're stuck between a rock and a hard place. FE7 manages to fuck all these up at once, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. It contradicts the story of FE6 constantly, whilst trying not to, and it demystifies elements of it by having legendary heroes like Athos show up. One of the few benefits to a prequel is its ability to add to the world building, but FE6 did a pretty good job with this in the first place. You go all over the continent and see aspects of everyone's countries and cultures. What does FE7 add to the world of Alive? You get a little bit more of a look at Bern, and that's it really. And as an independent story, FE7 barely covers most of the continent at all, which means it's relying on FE6 to make it better, rather than the other way around. Plus, when it comes to characters, a lot of the time the connections between the two games can feel really forced, and if anything, cheap. Take Corel for example. In FE6, he's a pretty cool character. The way he talks about his past self and how others refer to him is embellished and part of his mythos. It's not presented as being literally true. If he really did kill everyone, he wouldn't have been staying at an inn. Corel's description of himself is more out of disdain for his attitude in the past, and an attempt to make Noah stop idolizing him. But in FE7, nope, it's all literally true, and stupid. And then Bartra was turned into some kind of caveman for comedic effect. They decided to put the thing in with the arena and Carla, even though it doesn't match the established history. They made Myrnus into a joke too, for whatever reason. The closest thing you get to a meaningful tie-in is Zephiel, but it doesn't show us anything we don't understand already. I mean, I guess you get to see just how innocent and pure Zephiel used to be, but again, they kinda made a big deal out of that in FE6. And as for Eliwood and Hector, they're such non-characters in FE6 that expanding them doesn't really change how we view them in FE6's story at all. Knowing what they're like in FE7 doesn't somehow let us read into how they behave in FE6, because they have next to no screen time, and don't do anything. Another restrictive element of this game is the fact that it's a Fire Emblem game, or to be more specific, the fact that it adheres too closely to the traditional Fire Emblem formula. See, FE7 kinda tries to do a lot of new things. It's supposed to be a small-scale, secret conflict that doesn't really involve enemy armies or war of some kind, and it places more focus on a small cast and their interactions with each other. Plus it has all these different modes and parts and shit, and obviously the story tries to awkwardly force this mystery element into it too. You know, it's kind of funny that this is the only game in the series that tries to be a mystery, when there's a game literally called Mystery of the Emblem. But despite all this, the way the game is presented and played is almost exactly the same as FE6. Now obviously it has more objective variety, and there are nuances with the hit formula and crap, but that's besides the point. It broadly plays like a traditional Fire Emblem game. A strategy RPG where you deploy and control 10 or so units out of a total army of around 30. You're fighting against an enemy army that outnumbers you significantly on a relatively large map. The scale of the maps and the amount of enemies you fight tends to get larger the longer the game goes on. But all of these are practically incompatible with the more unique elements of FE7 that I outlined earlier. Now the conflict in FE7 might start small, like in most other Fire Emblem titles, but it scales up at a similar rate. And unlike in those other games, there is no enemy army to fight, because there ain't a war going on. But when the story needs a battle to happen, there have to be a lot of enemies. So the developers are forced to turn small scale encounters into large battles, and the writers have to pull stuff out of their ass to make this work in the story. You can see this starting in chapter 6, when a few assassins end up doing all sorts of extraneous stupid shit in order for there to be a big fight, and this just continues on and on throughout the game. But it's most noticeable with the Black Fang. I've complained about it before, they're supposed to be an elite assassins guild, yet there are almost endless waves of mugs from their group for you to kill throughout the entire game. The Black Fang basically ends up as a surrogate army for the story. It really stretches your suspension of disbelief that this is all secret, when there are going to be tons of corpses lying around following the many battles. Probably the worst offenders are Unfulfilled Heart and Battle Before Dawn. The sheer volume of dead people in close vicinity to Bern's palaces should really set off some alarm bells. I mean, it took ages to get the feds to leave me alone after someone found one corpse in my backyard. Ever since I've just been dumping them in the river. And when the Black Fang are all dead, you fight loads of morphs. At least those turn into dust when they die, but they're still a problem because Nurgle has to spend a resource that he needs in order to fulfill his objectives to create the damn things, which causes contradictions.
Actually, most of the Black Fang enemies were morphs. Sonya was replacing them all. Didn't you read the script? You guys are a joke. Hack frauds.
What the fuck are you doing here again? Get out of my basement. It's too deep for you. And anyway, you're wrong, and I can prove it, even if I accept you're right. What kind of logic is that, you ask? Well, first off, nobody talks about it being weird that the enemy bodies are disappearing or whatever, until well after they've been introduced to the concept of morphs by Athos. You'd think that would be something the lords would comment on. Oh, and if they are mostly morphs, then Nurgle's still spending tons of quintessence, even though he basically never has that kind of luxury. It doesn't work no matter how you look at it. Now, back to more important things. Alright, skill. Another problem with the whole small skill thing is that it doesn't really work well on the player side either. It's hard to sneak around when you're basically like 30 people or something. A lot of these issues would be greatly alleviated if FE7 was instead a more traditional JRPG. I mean, the story doesn't really have anything to do with armies anyway. It's about a bunch of teenagers finding out about some ancient evil and being sent on a quest by a wise old sage to gather legendary weapons to beat the big bad evil wizard. Sound familiar? If it was in this format, then most of the enemies would probably just be faceless monsters that you fight while going through a dungeon to get a weapon or whatever. And nobody cares about them, so we don't need an explanation. I know Fire Emblem has done monsters before, but they couldn't do it here, because it's set in an established world that has no history of such things. So that's like an interconnected problem to do with its prequel status. Even the one time they kind of do it with ghosts, it already raises some questions. Plus, in this format, you can have story or character developments happen whenever you want, instead of being pigeonholed into the beginning and the end of the chapters, as well as that shitty support system. So you can actually focus on a small cast of highly developed characters who all have a role in the story, instead of this weird in-between that we have now with, for example, Lyn. Now, I'm not saying it would have been impossible to make FE7 work as a Fire Emblem game, but you need to have someone in charge with some creative vision, who's willing to rework mechanics, shake things up, change the formula, you know, like Shaozo Kaga. And as for the core plot, well, I think I've made it pretty clear that this game's core plot is written objectively badly. It's fundamentally broken on so many levels. The way the story flows from moment to moment is a haphazard nightmare to navigate, and a patchy translation just makes things even more confusing. The only way the plot manages to even maintain a facade of structural integrity is the way it constantly hurries from point to point, so you never have enough time to actually take in any of the information and process it properly. And as a result of this, your brain fills in the gaps, making the story seem like it's put together much better than it really is. I've already questioned whether the writers were doing this intentionally or not, and I'm still not completely sure. But the evidence that sways me a little bit towards thinking it's on purpose is centered around a key member of the staff, and his approach to game design and storytelling, which you can clearly see in modern entries like Fates and Awakening. But, before I talk more about him, I have to address something important. I've pointed it out earlier, so I'm well aware that FE7 has a much bigger emphasis on the cast of characters and their interactions with each other than the older entries. This is a trait that it shares with the modern installments. I've generally avoided criticizing scenes dedicated to this, especially when they pertain to the main cast, and I haven't bashed the protagonist's actions much at all. Most of my character complaints have been about the antagonists. The reason for this is that whilst I don't care very much for the cast, I don't really have any issues with most of them either. I just don't generally see fundamental flaws with how the characters are written. There are exceptions like Athos, Jafar, and Nino, but for the most part, the characters work. They all have their own little stories going on, and the ratio of exaggerated joke characters to more down-to-earth ones is reasonable. That's not exactly high praise, but I can't really write paragraphs upon paragraphs about how much I love everybody, because most of the cast is just not that appealing to me. The only stuff I feel is notable is some of the development that Uther, Hector, and Oswin have going on, and that's fine. I get that the rest of it appeals to other people more. It's okay for a game to be focused on the characters, but just because a game is more interested in character interactions doesn't mean the plot has to go down the shitter. Yeah, sure, not every story has to have a sensible plot, but like I said way back, this game is not making some kind of postmodernist statement.
Now, I'm not saying that the game has to spell everything out, but if stuff that makes no sense happens, and there's no reasonable explanation, then that'll just make your audience confused. This can work if your intent is to frustrate the audience, or maybe make them think a little bit about the ideas presented in the story. See if there's some kind of contradiction in society, or genre tropes, or the like. But this game ain't trying to do that shit. None of the illogical actions or stupid plot holes in this story serve any purpose whatsoever, let alone some kind of fucking meta-narrative.
And it's not like there's just some problems with the plot, the problems are everywhere. The scale of them is so vast that it boggles the mind. A story can have both an emphasis on character interactions and a robust plot. Just look at FE8 and FE9, they're not masterpieces or anything, but there's way less to complain about there. No story is gonna be perfect, but that isn't an excuse to just ignore the problems or settle for less. And you don't have to unconditionally stick up for the whole game, just because you liked some aspects of it. It's okay to like things that you can recognize as having problems, or even just being bad. You just have to be honest about it. Speaking of honesty, or should I say dishonesty, remember what I was talking about earlier? Whether the writing in this game was deliberately misleading or not? Well, this guy here, he's the key to all this.
There's a key to all this.
His name is Ko Heyama. And he's responsible for everything bad in Fire Emblem. Everything! It's all his fault. But to help you understand this, I gotta explain a lot of things together that won't make any sense until the very end. I'm gonna sound like some crazy, tinfoil hat wearing, conspiracy theorist, conservative talk show radio host. But you gotta trust me. Would this face lie to you? Oh my god.